Hey, welcome to Christ the Lord Clearwater's weekly message. I'm Pastor John Backus here in our studio in Clearwater, Florida, where we share the good news of Jesus on the Gulf Coast. Today I'm starting a new message series, part 1 of 4, called Meet Me Inside, an invitation to explore issues in mental and emotional health. Let's jump into our thought life and begin a thought trip. Let's say we're leaving the planet. So you're in a spacesuit, which you've tried on and practiced with, and you have your supplies with you. After practicing with your spacesuit and your supplies on Earth, you kind of feel confident. But when you get to your destination planet, things are much harder than you had expected because you went to Jupiter. And in Jupiter, even though it's still you with your spacesuit and your supplies, gravity is just 2.5 times heavier, more forceful than what you experienced on Earth. Even though you didn't really change, the environment made just getting around and coping with the challenges of the day that much more difficult. Life got heavier. The same thing happened in our community, perhaps in our nation, about 18 months ago. 18 months ago, we saw the start of a mental health crisis in connection with the COVID pandemic. 18 months ago, you would have found that about 17% of people could be clinically diagnosed with depression or anxiety or an addictive challenge in their life. Now that number is up to 40%. It used to be that 1 in 5 essentially in our church struggled with this. Now almost half the room. That's why I want to talk to you under this theme, Meet Me Inside, because it's so relevant to so many. Now we can do that to some degree through a message series like this. But I do want to acknowledge what I'm able to help with and what I'm not. If we think of the financial world, if you have questions about finances, you could ask your buddy for a tip, or you could go to your local bank if it's more complicated, or maybe you even need to go to a CPA or to a lawyer. In the same way, when we talk about mental and emotional health, we need to know what level of care or counseling that we're looking for. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I'm not a licensed mental health counselor, and I want you to know that. So some of the things in your life I may not be qualified to speak in. So I do it at all. I do it because in Christian communities we've long cared about the inner life of people. In the history of the church body I'm a part of, back in its roots in Europe and Germany, the term was Seelsorger, or a pastor was a Seelsorger. Care of the soul was the calling of the church, and the pastor of the church was viewed as one who cared for the soul. Our souls are not just the end story of our life. Like, our soul is not your destiny someday that either experiences heaven or hell. The soul is the inner life that animates your body. If your body is a container, inside your container we've got these abstract things like your intellect, your emotion, and your will, what you think, what you feel, what you want. You've got a soul right now, and to care for your soul doesn't only mean that the church is interested in saying something that's going to happen down the road. We also want to care for the soul that you have right now, for your inner life right now. And if there's a way for us to do that, if there's a way for me to help you improve and thrive more with your mental and emotional health right now, I want to provide good care of the soul, to be a Seelsorger, and have you meet me inside for this conversation. To me, this conversation is important because it helps to normalize something that's very common, but isn't commonly talked about or hasn't been. When I say I want to normalize issues in mental or emotional health, I'm not saying to normalize them as good. It's good that they're around us. I'm saying I want to acknowledge that they're not extreme anymore. It's not weird or shunned or taboo to talk about how we're doing on the inside. It doesn't have to be the realm of a shrink or an asylum. To look with compassion at each other or at ourselves and say, how are we doing? Because we're in a mental health crisis, that 40% of us are struggling in this way, it's not extreme for you to find yourself with a mood problem where your lows are just too low and you can't seem to pull yourself up, low energy, just your mood is tanked, or to be high-strung continuously and to really be wound so tight that it's disrupting the normal course of your life with anxiety. To have depression or anxiety issues can lead to problems in our sleep, which is how we recharge not only our facilities, but also get our body restored. It can lead to maladaptive coping techniques. We reach for things that only help short term, but do damage long term. Addictive habits and addictive problems that come into our lives. Because mood disorders, depression and anxiety, and addictive patterns make it harder to live, I want to address them in whatever ways that I can. Because when it's hard to live, we also become harder to live with. And you live with other people. We live with each other in our church community, in our families. We do jobs together. We're part of family systems. And the harder it is for me to live my own life with so much weight and gravity, or lack of sleep, or anxiety to depression, the harder it is for me just to live, it becomes harder for other people to live with me. They have to worry about what I'm feeling, and what I'm feeling leaks out on them. And then this cycle continues, because when I'm harder to live with, it makes somebody else's life harder. Things just become more complex as we struggle more and more with being healthy people next to other healthy people. It's not always easy to see also where to begin or what's really going on in mental or emotional health issues. Sometimes the root cause is hidden. It often is hidden. When we feel scared because there's some threat out there, whether it's a threat to our health, the possible loss of a job, a concern about a change in job dynamics or expectations. Many people had to stop going into the office, try to figure out how to manage a job from home through web conferencing software. Our parenting roles changed, school patterns changed, jobs were lost, maybe your home or your place of living was lost. There is so much that is not safe in terms of a virus floating around, or even the social challenges of disagreement about what the appropriate responses are for a virus to deal with a pandemic. There's so much unsafe territory out there that we live with subtle fear in the background and a greater sense of stress. But that's hidden. Instead, what you see is a secondary emotion, which is feeling angry or feeling irritated. We can get loud, we can get caustic, or we can just shut down. Your family or your marriage or the friends or workplace that you're in may have experienced some of the greatest tension and angst. You may have had the most difficult year in your marriage as communication dropped off, or you just got on each other's nerves more, couldn't see eye to eye, tensions or breaks in your family relationships. The goal, of course, is to find a way to keep these meaningful relationships strong and not have the joys of life be lost. We want to gain what Psalm 51:10 says is a steadfast spirit. A spirit, again, is your inner life, the thoughts and attitudes of your heart. We want that to be steadfast, to hold firm and steady, to be up to the challenges that come in our lives. If you'd explore my dining room, you'd see that I have a dining room table that is not very solid. It's not one of these big, heavy-duty ones. It's a little more lightweight. In fact, I've got some extra rope on the bottom tied underneath the leaves, holding it together so it'll stay in place. But if I would stand on top of that table to change a light bulb, I'm not sure it would hold my weight. The demands on it would be too great. It probably would crack or collapse. Life can do that to our spirits. When difficulties, when threats, when uncertainty comes into our life, our spirits can buckle under the weight, leading to cracks in our joy, in our psyche, in our relationships. We look for and long for maybe the virtues that come to us from God, not from trouble. Goals of having more love, more joy, more peace, and more patience, the fruit of the Spirit. I'm going to talk about 4 different issues that create injuries. The inspiration of this outline is from a Christian psychologist named Henry Cloud. The first thing that we'll talk about today is the injury or the issue of emotional isolation. Emotional isolation instead of a safe and trusted connection with other people. Humans were designed by God to be social. We're not all social to the same degree, but we have a need for interaction. It damages the human psyche when we are removed from interpersonal interactions. We're not designed to live in solitary confinement, in aloneness. Kind of like cell phones. You hold it up and it's trying to make a connection to a tower. Humans also are continually searching for connection. And we need that. We need to be interacting with other people in our lives. Only God himself is self-sustaining. He can run alone if he wants to, but not us. Part of being human is to be in a social setting. We need, therefore, safe emotional connections. But many of us experience something very different. We experience emotional isolation, where we feel cut off from other people. There's the story of a heart surgeon who was a professional. He was married and good at his job, but danger was on the horizon because he wasn't very professional in his life when he was known to have slept with many of the nursing staff at his hospital. His wife found out and kind of put it out there that you need to address this if we have any hope of staying together. The heart doctor came up with a list of to-dos, things that he was going to attempt to accomplish and put into place to stop the pattern in his life. His counselor looked at his to-do list and said, I think you're going to revert back to your old behavior. And the heart surgeon asked, why? And the counselor responded, well, just like the way hearts work, hearts take in and hearts pump blood out. People work that way too, and your checklist of what you're going to do to get through your maladaptive patterns and your promiscuity, you're putting stuff out on your list, but you're not talking about what you need to come into your life. What the counselor was getting at was trying to get to the why of the behavior. What is this doctor looking to fill in his life? What gap is there that leads him to these destructive behaviors that could end his marriage, ruin his career, cause lawsuits at the hospital, all sorts of consequences of promiscuity in the workplace? Why? What's at the heart? What's missing there that needs to be restored or replaced to change the status? Well, a simplified view would just be to say this heart doctor had a problem, a sin problem. What is sin? It's doing what's wrong. If you do wrong things, you sin. Is sin is being sinful? We just say this guy should stop doing wrong stuff, right? But remember that sin is both the wrong instincts in us, but it also causes incidents. And sin instincts lead to sin incidents. Sin incidents usually show up in life as some sort of failure of love, where we would have expected it, or broken trust, where we would have expected trust. An example of this is, even though we all start with sin instincts, incidents can make things worse. When you find yourself in a sense of innocence, and things should be safe, you should be loved, but instead something bad or threatening proves just how cruel and twisted the world and humanity can be. And when something cruel and twisted and unsafe is aimed at you or happens to you, our instincts change. We don't act the same way. We don't feel the same way about what's wise or smart after that. A sin incident, like a failure to receive love or trust that's been broken, leads to a warping of our instincts further. So someone who's had a failure of love might have a broken system or view of their self-esteem or their self-worth. And such a person might have this competitive drive to always be needing to prove I'm valuable, or to prove I'm worthwhile, to prove I'm worth something. Can be very driven, overly competitive, aggressive, not able to make peace, not able to compromise, always has to be up for the fight, is never content with anything but the top dog, is driven and caustic, trying to desperately prove my worth. Can be exhausting. When someone has experienced a breach of trust, that experience can change their instinct, and the person say, never again. I'm going to take the steps necessary so that what happened there isn't going to happen again, and can overcorrect by becoming increasingly and unhelpfully controlling. reaching beyond what would be the appropriate borders of my life and my behavior into other people's lives and other people's behavior. So I make sure that whoever hurt me last time, that nobody else can do that to me again. So when we see people acting this way, like always trying to prove worth or looking for ways to assert power or control over other human beings, often in a cruel way, using or manipulating and then throwing people away, it often reveals a painful incident, a loss of love, or a breach of trust in the past. Now, the ideal solution is for human beings to treat each other with the kind of love that God would view as humanitarian, to have safe emotional connections based on trust between us and others around us. Because there's so much broken sin instinct in humankind and these stories of sin incidents that mess up our instincts further, we all need allies. An ally is the person that is safe, that you consider on your side, that you don't have to defend against them, prove something to them. You're safe and you're protected, you can trust them. An ally is someone who's not a stakeholder in your life. You don't have to worry about scoring good for them, scoring high for them. It's not someone you have to perform for. An ally is not a stakeholder, not someone scoring you, not someone you perform for. And you might say, well, of course, we all have allies like that. You might point to our families, right? Is our family a place where that's the case? Well, not always. There can be dysfunction in our family settings. And, for example, a mom who's in a dysfunctional pattern in her mothering role might rely on the success of a child for her own sense of success. A dad might express extreme disappointment at the life choices of a son, feeling so disappointed or embarrassed at what the child is or accomplishes, and says, that doesn't build me up or make people impressed with me if they see the failure of my son. The disappointment of a dad looking at a child, or a mom having all this pressure that her kids better turn out better than the kids of the other moms, and that's how you stake your social place in the social ranking of a community. These are pressures where a mom or dad figure stops becoming an ally and instead is someone you have to be who is scoring you or someone you are performing for. As young adults, we look up to maybe our teachers or coaches, and we say, wow, that coach is a really grown-up athlete. They can play basketball, and I want them to teach me how so I can be well for them. But if teachers or coaches don't fill their roles appropriately, there can be breaches of trust there. You always feel like you only have the goodwill of your coach if you're one of his high-performing athletes or students in the classroom for a teacher. We might even say, well, the church is meant to be the place where there's where you're surrounded by allies. Your pastor, right? But I wonder if you're honest with yourself, is there a fear that church is the place where somebody is going to score you on your life commitment to Jesus or how moral you are? Do you think your pastor is giving you a grade in the sanctified level of living in your life, how committed you are to Jesus? It's not as easy a question to ask who truly is our ally. Like, it's not automatically mom, or it's not automatically dad, coach, teacher, church, or pastor. In a perfect world, they would, because in a perfect world, your ally is someone who's a true friend. Not a buddy or even a peer in age, but a true friend who expresses love and concern for you and has a relationship with you that you can trust. A safe place with safe others where you can be vulnerable. Now, vulnerable doesn't mean where you can be weak or weepy. What I mean by vulnerable is you don't feel like you have to be on high alert. You don't have to feel like you need your defensive systems up, your radar on for who's going to mess with you and who's going to attack you, who's going to put you down, who's going to leave you. You just feel safe. You're not fighting anybody. You're not running and fleeing in flight. No fight, no flight. Just safe, trust, appropriate boundaries and interactions. So as we work with challenges to our mental and emotional health, and we say, here's things that I need help working on, what we truly need in our lives are trusted counselors, people who care about us, and because they love us and are safe, we're not only confident having an emotional connection with them, sharing details about us in our lives with them, but also hearing back to receive guidance and receive input and correction from others. But it's more easy or more likely that people in our lives would tend to treat our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, the things we need help with, not as a trusted counselor, but as a tabloid journalist. What a sad reality is that some people view church communities as that. Like, if the news gets out about where you came from, or what your childhood story was, or what your addiction is, or what you actually feel, or what your depression is doing to you, or what you've reached out and tried to do to cope with your anxiety, which isn't godly at all, and then your story gets out, it'd be like blasted in the tabloids at your local church or your local coffee shop if people knew, and so the world just doesn't feel safe. There's so much potential in communities, in families, and yes, in the church, for us to build allies, true friends, trusted counselors. But it's not automatic. The Apostle Paul wrote in the scriptures to churches in Galatia, he said, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Serve one another humbly in love." The alternative is, if you bite and devour each other, watch out or you will be destroyed by each other. It's possible for the worst of humankind to come out, for us to be attacking instead of protecting, destroying instead of building up. I recently heard the illustration that anytime you enter and leave a room, you have either given life to somebody or taken from their life. There's so much power by the words and actions, the way we approach our interpersonal relationships, that we can either serve and build up in love, safe, trusting relationships that build emotional connection, or untrustworthy, unsafe, unloving interactions that cause emotional isolation. Ecclesiastes 4, the wise writer said, "I saw the tears of the oppressed, they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter." That's what we want to avoid in our families, in our communities, in our personal lives, being lost in our own troubles. Instead, with compassionate hearts, we want to build safe emotional connections. Let's go to the story of Jesus for an example of how this might look. Jesus came to earth, and this isn't a thought experiment. He actually left the heavenly realm and traveled to our planet when he was born in a human body in the incarnation. And he carried a heavy weight that even God himself wouldn't be expected to carry, the weight of human sin guilt. And this was so emotionally distressing to him and morally distressing that he became distraught. It was an evening in a local park outside of Jerusalem, and he had some of his friends with him. A few of them were closer, so he said, "Come with me. I need to go pray, but I don't want to do it alone. Will you be there for me?" And even though he trusted his friends, they weren't always trustworthy. They fell asleep on him instead of hanging in there with him. And when he called out to them, "Allies, I need help," his disciples, as honorable and committed as they were, dropped the ball on that occasion. And so it wasn't the earthly allies that refreshed Jesus in the garden. It was divine allies, as the Heavenly Father sent angels to attend and strengthen Jesus. And this has to be the order that we, in which we look for support and help in building healthy emotional and mental lives. We have to start with the foundational place that you can always count on for your sense of safety and value, a place you can trust. So Christians and followers of the Savior God for thousands of years have said things like this about the Lord: "My God is my rock, in whom I find protection." Safe and trustworthy. The whole story of Jesus using himself to take care of us and doing it well. He cares and he acts for our well-being. That's what the salvation plan says. It says God cared about you and did what was necessary to address your deepest wrongs and replace them with things of beauty, virtues, and a good future someday. We find in God safety that we can trust, the basis for a healthy emotional connection. But we also hope that we can avoid what Jesus' disciples did, leaving him hanging on a night when he was in distress. We want to be aware of opportunity to build emotional connection with each other. And that's part of what our goal is as a local neighborhood church. We love the stories, for example, of brotherhood, of Jonathan, a royal, and David, a farmer, getting together and finding friendship that you could trust, steadfast, rock solid, safe friendship. Jonathan was one in spirit with David, loved him as himself, and Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the royal robe he was wearing and gave it to David along with his tunic and even with his sword, his bow, and his belt. There is an openness, an exchange of value, a sharing of me with you and entrusting myself to you. That considerate nature and that trusting nature that David and Jonathan built is what we would desire to be a part of our faith life in our church community, as well as in families and neighborhoods. Because we desire that and we want to grow that, discover it, and live it, that's one of the reasons why our church does the little community care projects that we do. They don't change the world, they help someone, but they also make sure that we as a church family are exercising the kind of muscles that we want to be strong in our relationships. We want to see each other doing acts of compassion and care because we know each other's faces sometimes, know each other's names sometimes, but when we cooperate on acts of care, then we know that this Christian would do something that would take care of this Christian, and this Christian would do something that would take care of this Christian, and this Christian would do something that would take care of a neighbor he hasn't even met yet. And as we not only exercise those muscles, but as we see each other doing acts of kindness for which there's no reciprocation or payback, we start to trust each other, and it begins to make a church community a place where you can let down your guard because you know people care. People are going to love me, and I can trust others. That's why some churches, and ours included, would like to not just talk about being a nice and friendly place in terms of hospitality, but a meaningful place in terms of relationship, to not just be a friendly church, but a church of friends, allies who are safe and you can trust. This will allow us to regain in our culture with political divides and social media attacks and competitions, tabloids, and just harsh public critics on all media and internet and news channels. We want to regain the concept of sanctuary, to be not just a campus, but a place of relationships where there is safety involved. You don't have to be on high alert against people who are going to hurt you. Part of that means we'll look for ways in our church and in our personal lives to redefine relationships and the way that we act, to be aware of sin instincts that cause sin incidents, to stop them or reverse them when we can. Over the next 3 parts of this message series, we'll be talking about things to watch for and things that we can adjust, that with God's help, His approval, love, and forgiveness, and of course His power and wisdom, that will allow us to improve the mental and emotional health of ourselves and each other, to build good ally relationships of true friendship based on trust and love, and to take good care of one another and honor God in the process. Hope you'll stick with me for part 2 coming up next week as you meet me inside.